Spirit. Amen. Hello, this is Father Stephen Allen speaking from St. Irene of Cristovalando Orthodox Church in Rochester Hills, Michigan. This is the second talk in our second series of the 70 times 7, the Boundless Garden of Orthodoxy video series. This topic, our topic today, is worship, the role of worship in our Orthodox lives and in the Church. In our first talk, we spoke of the spiritual life in reference to our private prayer at home. And right now I want to talk about our worship in church and the relationship of our so-called private prayer life to the so-called public worship of the church, because the two are interrelated. Today there are two very large problems in the relationship of Orthodox people to the worship of the church. One big problem is that most Orthodox people do not understand the structure of the church services or the cycle of the church services. And so they just walk into church and the services just sound like an unremitting avalanche of sound, of hymns and chants that are coming at them, and certain gestures, certain movements that they remember, but they're not aware of the structure of the service. So they don't know the logos or the rationale behind the parts of the services, or even which service is going on. And the other problem, and perhaps, and certainly actually more profound problem, is that our lives in general are not lived liturgically. Our Orthodox forebears lived in societies in which every day was known as a certain day in the church calendar. And they lived their annual cycle according to the church calendar. And then every time of the day is a time devoted to a certain church service. And even if they could not attend every one of the services, they were acutely aware of which services went with which time of the day, and that the day was sanctified by the cycle of the church services. Unfortunately, for most Orthodox people today, when they think of going to church, they think only of the Divine Liturgy. And that's a very great distortion of the understanding of our liturgical life, because the Divine Liturgy, though it is the main service and the most important service, is inherently better experienced and only really understood in light of our participation in the other services of the church. The church actually has a daily cycle of services. In the West, it's called the Divine Office. In the East, we simply call it Vespers and Matins and Compline and the Midnight Office and the Hours. And this daily cycle of services is the continuous sacrifice of prayer that the prophets speak of, and that has been encouraged and taught by the Holy Fathers in all the history of the New Testament church as well. That every part of the day and of the night should be sanctified to God. So what are these services? The church's day begins at sunset with the service of Vespers, in Greek esperinos. And Vespers, along with Orthros or Matins in the morning, is one of the two main services, or we call them the hinge services, of the cycle of the daily services. And after Vespers, in the evening before we go to bed, is a service of Compline, or in Greek apodipnon, the prayers that we read before going to sleep, or the service performed in church before we go to sleep. In the middle of the night is a service of mesoniktikon, or the midnight office, in which we rise in the middle of the night, offer prayer to God, and in the weekday mesoniktikon, the substance or the bulk of the service is the reading of Psalm 118, or the 17th Kathisma, the longest psalm. And then later, theoretically, at cockcrow or 3 a.m. until dawn, is the service of Orthros or Matins, which is the other main, along with Vespers, is the other main service of the day, one of the hinge services of the day, and the longest service in the daily cycle. And Matins takes us from when it's still dark until the dawning of the day. And then throughout the day, there are 4 hours, the first, the third, the 6th, and the 9th hour. The first hour in the old Roman time is the moment of the rising of the sun, roughly 6 in the morning. The third hour is roughly 9 in the morning, when the sun is halfway between the horizon and the zenith, The 6th hour is at noon, and the 9th hour occurs when the sun is halfway between the zenith and sunset. And that takes us through the entire day. And then at sunset, it begins all over again with Vespers. See? So in a monastery where this is experienced fully, we actually experience the consecration of the entire day to God. And I think most of us understand that in monasteries, that is the case. But what many of us have forgotten is that for our Orthodox ancestors, their lives also in the village or in the neighborhood church were also sanctified, if not by all of the services, at least by Matins and Vespers, or Orthros is the other word for Matins. Orthros and Vespers on a daily basis. And during the middle of the day, many of our Orthodox forebears knew the hours by heart and could recite them by heart. Or certainly could recite the Apodicton or Compline by heart before they went to bed at night. I remember speaking to an elderly parishioner, and she remembers her uncle who would get them all up in the village. They lived in a village in Greece. He'd get them all up at 1 a.m. to read Mesonicticon. And she remembered this. And I had another elderly parishioner who remembers as she was going to sleep at night, her grandmother was up in the same room reciting all the evening prayers, Vespers, Apodicton, and so forth as they were going to sleep. See? So we have to, even if we cannot reproduce this lifestyle because of our circumstances, we should study the structure of the offices and understand that this is actually not an extreme but a norm. See? For our Orthodox forebears, they thought of life liturgically, and worldly things were an intrusion. We think of secular life as being the norm and worship as being the intrusion. Now, practically, how can we recover some of this perception or feeling? One thing to do is simply first of all, get 2 books. One is the Blue Prayer Book I spoke of in our first talk from Holy Transfiguration Monastery. And the other is a little red book, also from Holy Transfiguration Monastery, called the Book of the Hours. If we have these 2 little books, we have parts of this entire cycle of services. In the Blue Prayer Book, we have the basic parts of Vespers, Compline, and Matins. And in the Red Book, we have the other services. And to get these books, and even if you can't use all of it at once, open up and look at it and realize begin to realize the riches of the church's services, and begin to realize that we should move on from simple daily prayers to actually participating more in the cycle of the divine services, of the Vespers and Matins and the hours. How can we start doing this? One way to start doing this is in the evening to read Compline, which is actually the standard evening prayer in the Greek Church, which is part of the cycle of divine services. And in the morning, to add to our morning prayers, to go to the Matins section in the prayer book and begin memorizing, or at least saying, the 6 Psalms, which are the most solemn and characteristic part of the Matins service. So let's try that. Say Compline every evening, and then start reading the 6 Psalms in the morning as a beginning to being integrated into this daily cycle of services. And when we start doing this, we're more motivated to go to Vespers and Matins when they're read in the church or sung in the church. And we start realizing how the Divine Liturgy is not something in isolation, that we prepare for the Divine Liturgy by Vespers and Compline and Matins and reading the hours. The Divine Liturgy is outside of time. It is an eschatological service. It lifts us to the kingdom of heaven. But before we're really prepared for that, we have to sanctify the time of this world and our daily lives through the cycle of the church services. Sanctifying time through the Vespers and Matins and the hours, then reaching beyond time in the Divine Liturgy. Let's try to take some baby steps to begin this, and we'll see the benefit. To the glory of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, living and reigning into the ages of ages. Amen.